Welcome to part 2 of my presentation on special ed assessment. Students with special needs need support to reach their potential, and that's what the IEP process does. These are the IEP requirements as stated in the reauthorization of IDEA. They are also listed in Chapter 1 of Spencer and Cohen, which you can find in course materials, Session 2, and handouts. And I believe this might even be a quiz question. Statement of present level, measurable annual goals, how you will measure progress, special education related services and inclusion in the regular classroom, timeout of the regular classroom, accommodations, and project date for start of services. I've also got a link here to the New York State IEP website, which contains all kinds of useful information, what forms to, referral forms, assessments that have to be done, all kinds of good stuff. Information and resources for disability learning, individual educational program. You can see here IEP directions, general IEP forms. So a lot of good stuff. If you plan on working for the Board of Ed, especially in special ed, good website to become familiar with. All right. This is a a chart I believe I made up. It could be in Waterman, I'm not sure. But Waterman compares the two terms here, assessment versus testing. And you need to know that the assessment is a process. It requires multiple ways of making inferences about what a student can do, or is like. It's usually done over a period of time. It's not a one-shot deal. Like I said, it's a process. It's a problem-solving process. Whereas testing happens at a given time. It's a one-shot picture rather than a photo album. So many different tests or assessment types gives a much better photo album. Usually is standardized. Or given at the end of learning. And you'll learn what standardized means, a standardized test. Many of you will be floored to find out that the tests you give in your class are standardized tests. One of the things that we will focus on right now is that every child has a right to a non-discriminatory evaluation. And of course that's a generalized statement. What is a non-discriminatory evaluation? Well, it really has to be through unbiased assessments that have been validated for what they're supposed to be used for. So they must reflect the aptitude and achievement of the child rather than his impairment. So if you're giving an oral test to somebody that's hearing impaired, not good. So that may seem obvious, but it's written into the law for a reason. Again, you can't use one single test to determine classification. Now, very often they used to use an IQ test and an achievement test to determine if a student was learning disabled. Now, we'll talk about that more, and you'll read more about that. It's called the IQ Achievement Discrepancy Model. And typically that alone was used to identify a student as being learning disabled. Well, that's not the case anymore. We also, the evaluation must be conducted by a multidisciplinary team, and you'll see if you go into part 200 regulations who needs to be on that team. I'm not going to go into that right now, but a child has to be assessed in all of these areas in order to figure out exactly what is causing lack of achievement, which is typically how a student ends up being referred for an IEP. Types of instruments. These are some more requirements for how a student should be tested, administered in its native language, and it's got to be validated for that language. So you can't just translate a test and give it to a student. So take a reading assessment and translate it for a student unless it's a test that's been validated in that language. So that's why you got to be careful. In most cases, tests should be administered by trained personnel, but if you become a special ed teacher, you'll discover that there are assessments that you can give just by reading the manual. There are others like the WISC-R. I had to be certified to give the WISC-R. It took training. I had to give the test, and then I got feedback on my interpretation of the results. And I think I had to do 10 tests before I could get certified. So, but typically that's not the case. That's a little summary of what happens with instrumentation. Many of you will have signed up for this course thinking you're going to, I'm going to learn all about different tests, and that is not what you're going to learn about. I have in course materials, I have a folder that has assessments in it. And these are the ones that are most commonly used in special educations. I have a little blurb for each one. But again, I've also added some websites here that you can click onto. I like this reading assessment database. I believe it is all kinds. It gives a great breakdown of every reading test that you can imagine. So here's the Brigance kindergarten and first grade screening test. There you go, a screening test. So we talked about that. So that's good stuff if you're interested in looking at. There's some other sites here. Burroughs, I believe you have to get a paid subscription. But most of your stuff you can get from your school psychologist. You know, what is my school district using? And then read the manual. And typically that will be all you need. All right, I'm going to stop here, and this will be part 2. And when we come back, we'll talk about IDEA.